Hello, Mordarim here. Today I want to explain to you why I think the Druid class is a complete joke. And this one is based on hundreds of hours of playtime on this class. I experimented with tons of different builds. And I can confidently tell you that this class has massive issues. The biggest example of this one is the dependence of this class on certain uniques. Basically every single build that wants to push High Nightmare Dungeons or Uber requires certain uniques. And this is to do with how the class is designed. Specifically, when we look at the skill tree, you might think, oh man, there's a lot of options here. You can pick and choose different abilities, slap it on your skill bar and just rock the end game, right? No, completely not true. Basically, half the abilities on the tree are complete garbage. They are not useful to anyone. And specific abilities are mandatory for basically every single endgame build to function. Some because they are so powerful that it's a waste to not pick them. But most are just completely useless. The best example I can give you is, for example, Boulder. The Boulder ability is complete garbage. There is basically nothing redeeming about this skill. The lucky hit chance is extremely low, it has a long cooldown, the damage is subpar, and the worst thing about this ability is it cannot get through doors, it basically stops working on unstoppable enemies, it disappears on even invisible walls, even with just a small little pebble on the ground. It's going to disappear and not deal any damage. And you wasted basically a massive cooldown on this one, or if you have the aspect that makes this one a core ability, you wasted 60 spirit on this. 60 spirit! That's a ton of spirit you're wasting on just this ability. Then you look at Rabies. Rabies has a massive amount of poison damage, right? Well, actually no, because when you look at Poison Creeper, the basically only useful companion ability, you have like 10 times the amount of the poison damage. So there's basically no point in picking Rabies except for speed farming lower level dungeons. So endgame pushes with just this ability are impossible, because there are much better options. If you want to push high endgame dungeons, you want to basically pick a defensive ability. One massive complaint I have seen a lot of my viewers make is this build, my threat build, doesn't have Unstoppable. Now you can actually get Unstoppable, but you need the Vasilis helmet like so, and Earthen Bulwark, because you need to skill into Earthen Bulwark, and Earth skills are now Werewolf skills, and then you pick the Zenith, Hunter Zenith ring, and this one will then make your Werewolf skills, basically your Earthen Bulwark, not trigger a cooldown, and so you can spam this one indefinitely and have uptime on Unstoppable basically all the time. Now this requires 2 uniques, which brings me to the point of uniques. You basically always need uniques for endgame builds. If you play a build without any uniques, you're basically playing a scuffed build. And this makes us something that's really garbage for this class, because this class requires you to pick Shapeshifting. Basically every single human build will get better with a Tempest Roar or Vasili. There are no exceptions to this, because you get access to affixes that increase your armor by basically double that you can get with the total armor one, and you get access to this spirit boom, Masochistic, 3% maximum life as a heal whenever you critically strike. Why is this one a shapeshifting ability? When we compare this one to the lightning version, that's a lucky hit for 20% base lightning damage. A lucky hit, 20% base luck. It's insane, it's so bad. Overload is so incredibly bad. Obsidian Slam is completely useless for any boss. You need 20 kills to overpower one skill, and overpower is super into endgame anyway. It's so much better to just stack critical strikes. And then you have Calm Before the Storm. Calm Before the Storm is good. However, it's only good for very specific builds. When we look at the ultimate abilities, for example, half of them are garbage. Like Cataclysm, you might think the lucky hit chance is high, but it's the lucky hit chance over the duration. So 8 seconds, 60% chance that one of your single target hits with the lightning bolt is going to trigger a possible lucky hit. It's incredibly bad for lucky hits. And this one has a hefty cooldown attached to this. It's 60 seconds base. And then you think you have cooldown reduction on your gloves and your amulet additionally for storm skills, but this one stacks multiplicatively. So the lowest cooldown you can get on this one is around 24 seconds. So you don't have 100% uptime on this one. You still depend on the Calm Before the Storm's lucky hits to decrease the cooldown of this ability. But it deals so little damage compared to everything else in the game. You don't have any multipliers for this one. It's not a core ability, so you cannot access basically everything that the game offers you, because this one doesn't have an aspect. And when we look at basically every other ability on the skill tree, only very few have any aspects attached to them. All of them are focused around Grizzly Rage, which gives you bonus damage, damage reduction, scaling damage bonus, you get Unstoppable for the whole duration, you get Fortify basically all the time, so this ability is completely overloaded with stats. Lacerate is complete garbage. It has a very high cooldown and completely sucks when looking at just the damage, because your core abilities deal so much more. So why pick this one? You have immune. Well, yeah, you have immune on this build specifically, but you waste a slot just to get this immune ability. It's basically completely useless outside of this one. And there's also a ton of bugs, like for example, Lightning Storm getting you stuck on basically every other cast. When you channel this one, you sometimes don't stop channeling and you need to press the button for like 2 seconds and enemies clobber you, and this one is extremely clunky to play because they possibly never playtested this one. Lightning damage also doesn't have any multipliers, more multipliers on aspects. So you're forced to circumvent this by building into companions, but companions are also completely useless. You have wolves. Why are wolves dealing like no damage? That's the whole purpose of them. The cooldowns of them are also incredibly high. Only Poison Creeper can be used because of Blurred Beast and the Werewolf one, the Werewolf Pop one. I think that's the Changeling Depth aspect. But the Changeling Depth aspect is also bugged and doesn't apply to suppressor affected enemies. So when you have a suppressed enemy and you use your poison on them and then you try to pop the poison, it doesn't work because it's not consumed. Or it is consumed but then reapplied and the damage doesn't apply. It's complete garbage. Like, there's a ton of different bugs like that. On most builds you're forced to pick Earthen Bulwark and the Unstoppable buff. Why? Because you don't have any mobility. The mobility this class gets access to is limited to Trample, which has a massive cooldown. So even on a lightning build you need to pick Trample. The damage node, the Innate Earthen Bulwark, is a bugged more multiplier that scales with the enemy level. So when you're doing Nightmare level 100 dungeons, you're basically only dealing damage because this one is buggy. If you go to Uberlilith at level 100, it's atrocious to play. You deal basically no damage at all. Every single poison build, every single lightning build, every single tornado build is going to use Tempest Roar because it's so incredibly busted. Everything is built around that unique. Then you have Kronstaff, which is basically completely busted for Nature's Fury procs because you're casting 2 different spells at the same time. Where is it? Nature's Fury here. Nature's Fury, 30%. Then you have Perfect Storm, which is absolutely useless except for the early game. Most builds in the endgame also require Hurricane because you need to pop Hurricane to stack Disobedience, because otherwise you're going to die. You need a ton of armor, and this is the best way to stack this one. So you're either picking Hurricane or Poison Creeper, and Poison Creeper is not up all the time, so you need kind of Hurricane on every single build, because this one is mandatory for the additional damage reduction, for the additional slow, but the damage sucks, and this one only has one single aspect that increases the damage. So why is this an aspect on this class? Then you have a damage split between physical and lightning, especially for the storm skills. So half the storm skills are dealing physical damage like this one, and the other half is dealing lightning damage. So you cannot effectively scale this one with just lightning multipliers, like lightning damage, crit damage, something like that. And even then, you cannot really do high endgame nightmare dungeons without Tempest Roar for the lightning storm, because you're needing the additional sustain from Lust for Carnage for spirit generation. You can then stack Werewolf Total Armor on your boots, on your amulet. So that's another instance of increasing your defenses, making you tanky so you can push high nightmare dungeons. It gives you access to Masochistic, like I already said. So you are getting all your sustain through the Tempest Roar. Stuff like Tornado is basically borderline impossible to play because of the spirit sustain without Grizzly Rage. So you're building everything about Tempest Roar with the storm skills. So there is no room for a companion build, for a pure companion build, because all of those are either buggy and deal like 10% of the damage they are static to deal, or they just die. Like for example the wolves, there is no support for this one on your gear, on the tree. So those can get one-shot. The Necromancer minions at least don't get one-shot because they have a Death's Defiance or something like that node that reduces the damage or limits the damage to 30% of their health pool. But the wolves don't have that, so in the Uberlilith fight they get one-shot and they're dead constantly. Like yes, they respawn automatically, but this takes time. So the only usefulness this skill provides to the Druid class is basically the Shepherd's Aspect, which brings me to another point. That's the only single thing that scales lightning damage in this game based on just more multipliers. You have Edgemaster, but Edgemaster is basically not usable on this build because you are constantly out of spirit with this. So only time you're really benefiting from Edgemaster is when Earthen Might procs, which is basically mandatory on Lightning Storm builds, which locks a skill behind another rare aspect. A ton of people don't have that. Same with the Trample, same with the Shockwave for the Pulverize. Basically every single skill in the game needs a certain aspect to be considered good. Otherwise the skill is going to suck, because the base value for the skills are incredibly low, because the base utility for the skill is garbage. Lightning Storm has a lucky hit chance of 15%, but the damage of lightning damage depends highly on vulnerable uptime, but the only vulnerable uptime you get is by elemental exposure, which is a 10% chance on a 15% lucky hit chance, so that's 1% chance. So you need to hit an enemy 100 times with Lightning Storm to proc one single instance of vulnerable for 3 seconds. Then you have Cyclone Armor with a 10% non-physical damage reduction. You need an aspect to complete this one to 10% total damage reduction. 10% total damage reduction. On the skill slot, with their active, you knock back enemies. You can apply it vulnerable on this one, like so, but it has a hefty cooldown attached to it. And you need to get into melee range. And then you look at the Paragon Board, there's no companion support at all. There is nothing on the board there that indicates there is increased damage to minions, to your companions, despite there being a sector specifically for that. Nothing supports your REF skills. There are no human uniques. There are no companion uniques except the Storm one, Storm Companion 1. But the Storm Companion 1 is also a joke because this one doesn't have any control over the ability that the wolves get, Storm Hall. This one is an invisible cooldown. And this invisible cooldown procs lightning strikes every 20 to 25 seconds, but doesn't depend on anything. It doesn't scale with anything. So it's tickling enemies for like 1k damage. It's complete garbage, and it loses you a ton of different defensive stats that are important on the pen slots. So this one should be incredible for the defenses you lose, but it's not. Then you have aspects like, for example, this one. This one changes your wolves to werewolf companions and gives them the Rabies ability, but the Rabies ability is not considered your Rabies ability. So it's another instance of something you cannot scale, and the poison damage is basically non-existent. And the increase you get for your werewolves is a plus modifier, not a multiplicative modifier. So this one doesn't really buff your wolves at all. It should be a more multiplier, and even then your wolves will deal no damage. Another thing, most of the aspects you can find in the game are modifying either earth skills or your werewolf skills or your werewolf skills. But human, tornado and lightning builds only get one. Most of them are also dependent on lucky hit chance. But because the only lightning skill that is currently in the game has a very low lucky hit chance, they are basically never proccing, and it's a slot machine to deal mediocre damage at best. But like I said, pushing high knight redundance without uniques is basically impossible. It makes a class come together. Basically every single skill in the game gets improved by slapping on a Tempest Roar, or a Vasily, or a Gibbous, or a Kronstaff. All of them are rare. So you feel completely gimped during the whole leveling process because you don't find the aspects you need. Then you go into endgame. Then you find your aspects finally, possibly, because there is no target farming for aspects, by the way. So if you don't find a shockwave aspect for 70 levels, well, guess you're not playing Pulverize. You don't find the Dancer's Lightning, guess you don't play Lightning Storm. The Tornado one that targets single target, well, guess you're not playing Tornado. You don't have Blood Beast, guess you're not playing Poison. This feels incredibly bad. This class is not good out of the box. And then you get into the endgame, the hyper endgame, and you need specific uniques that are incredibly RNG, and you cannot push high knight redundance, except when you abuse a certain bug, like for example the Bulwark one. It's incredibly frustrating to see a class like this. It's all over the place. The design is inflated. There is so much stuff you can build around, but basically half of that is garbage. It's not usable at endgame. So I hope they will buff the baseline of this class, the base abilities of this class, integrate some of the aspects into the skills, make uniques less mandatory, like for example letting Masochistic proc on every crit, not just the shapeshifting abilities, because this would make human builds kind of viable, because you don't have any other sustain, but that's something I already talked about. And that would make the class actually kind of fun to build around and play from the get-go. And they could add another layer of aspects to support your lightning skills, to support your tornado skills, to support your wrath skills, to support your ultimate abilities, all of them, not just the Grizzly Rage. They can add support aspects for other keystones like the Storm one, because those are missing. It would be so much fun if you could just use Hurricane as a Righteous Fire style playstyle. You play around with, for example, this one having a chance to proc tornadoes on every tick. So a unique, for example, you pop your Hurricane and every single tick has a high chance to proc a tornado. Then you combine this one with, for example, Cataclysm, which has a way too high cooldown, but with enough cooldown reduction, you can get this one to a decent level. And they can build around lucky hits. Maybe build in a support ability that doesn't deal much damage, but lets you stack poison. Because currently, everything is just flat damage. So poison for the druid is not like the regular poison. You need to stack the poison, apply it as a base damage, and then pop it with one of the 2 aspects that you need to find. Otherwise, the poison builds are not going to deal any damage. They're complete garbage. But I think I ranted enough. This class is a joke, in my opinion. It's good, but also kind of not. Because it's dependent on a lot of different aspects, a lot of different uniques, and that shouldn't be the case for a class to feel good. Anyway, make sure to leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe, maybe join the channel with a membership, or donate if you have the spare coin. See you next time and bye.